Are you ready for part two? Choices after choices. This is the only story I really have to tell, the only story I really know well enough to tell. Naturally, it'll be honest, it's my story. My mother told me that she met my father when he was a milkman. I've seen pictures. He's pretty good looking. My mother thought my father was a little wild, which consequently made my mother like my father even more. She told me once that my father used to go to the pool hall while she sat and visited his parents on Sundays. His parents were very religious. It was the 1950s. He also had a motorcycle. He had worked on golf courses most of his life, but he really wanted to be a cowboy. He read a comic strip in the newspaper about a cowboy when he was a kid, and that was his dream. He didn't let it go. My mother goes along for the ride. Once she was getting ready to get on my father's bike, and it was drizzling rain. I said to her, "You know, Mother, some women would just say, 'No, I won't go.'" She looked at me and shrugged her shoulders. I thought she was holding back tears, but maybe I was wrong. She lifted her leg and mounted the bike, adjusting her hot pink helmet. See the kitchen story in part 3. When I was in grade 3, I asked my mother to dictate the spelling words to me. She said, "If they can't teach you that in school, I guess you're not going to learn it." I failed grade 3. When I failed grade 4, I was put in grade 5 under a probationary condition. They were considering putting me in the mentally retarded classroom. There was the daily reminder as the mentally retarded class was let out the door for recess, hanging on to a rope in hopes that they wouldn't wander off. I managed to pass. However, that didn't stop me from creating all kinds of trouble for my teacher, acting up and being silly. I guess nobody thought that there was trouble at home and I needed some attention. See Cozy Bungalow in the Cataract Story 2 in Part 3. We had moved to Uncle Bob's farmhouse because my father had lost his job at the Brampton Golf Course. He had been drinking and drove into a parked car. This meant we were living in the same town as my grandmother. She was a nurse, one of the first to be given some kind of education on the mentally retarded. One day I was left alone with her. I was rocking in the rocking chair. Apparently, she saw this as a sign of retardation. And standing behind my chair, she said, "You know, Joyce, there are places where they can help you." I spent a lot of time by myself on this farm, worried about being placed in a mental institution. The only thing that gave me any hope was that my little professor, a term used by my college professor when I took a course years later based on the book I'm Okay, You're Okay. It is a small voice inside my head that said, "You can't be retarded because you have the ability to ask yourself the question, 'Are you retarded?'" I was able to ask that question, so I convinced myself that I was sane. That course was the best therapy I ever had. We had to write our life script explaining what messages we got growing up from our parents and how these messages helped to develop our behavior now. The teacher had written, "Wow, and that's quite the little professor you have," and such comments like that in the margins of my paper. That's when I finally figured out that maybe I didn't have the same upbringing as everyone else. He seemed so amazed with my report. I thought we all just wanted to live like Leave It to Beaver. I didn't think anybody really did. After the farm, we moved up north to Terrace Bay, Ontario, on the northern shores of Lake Superior. My father had gotten a job. He was a greenskeeper for the Terrace Bay Golf Course. He could bring his horses with him, as we were going to live in a house that was provided with the job, and it had 3 acres behind it. My father put up an electric fence to keep the horses in. I was in grade 6 at the time and an owner of a new pair of glasses, which didn't help much with my insecurities. I didn't think I was very pretty, and they weren't helping. By this time in your life, you've learnt the rules that kids hang out in groups, and being the new kid, I was worried about making friends. I managed to nab 2 friends, making me feel a little safe. We weren't the popular group, but we weren't the losers or loners, and that was what was most important. Sheila was my best friend, and we let Darlene hang out with us. Sometimes we didn't treat Darlene very nicely. I feel bad for Darlene now, but at the time, it just seemed to be the thing to do. My mother was known to me as the Mac Tack Queen. She could Mac Tack anything into function. Once I remember her Mac tacking boxes into drawers to hold clothing. This skill was passed on to me when my husband and I were first married. He had bought a second-hand large fridge, the kind that has a freezer pull-out drawer at the bottom. For some reason, when you wiped it down, the paint came off. Mac Tack to the rescue. I could only find enough rolls in a red brick pattern, fake brick. The brick fridge was always a conversation starter at our house. Once I opened the door because everybody just took it for granted that it was a chimney. It was kind of sad to see that fridge go. I learned a lot of things from my mother, and one of them was to always have a project on the go, especially if you have to wait for something. It was good advice. I always have a project on the go. Family meals were always made by my mother. That was a constant. She hated to go to the grocery store, but once that chore was done, her groceries were delivered to her door. A daily event for most people in this town was to go to the post office, where everyone had their own little silver box to open with their mail key, pull out their bills, and sometimes there was fun things like a letter from a friend or a relative. While we sat at the table, the legs spray painted in light green with a white top, faded flower design stained with plenty of pots of teas and mugs, we couldn't help but notice that the people that walked by our window. Gossip material. Everyone sparked a report on what their kids were up to and who was doing what and where. This was the hub of the home. This is where it all went down. The lectures, the support, the advice, the pressure, the shame, and the sharing. We were served tea and we gossiped even about each other, depending on who was there. My father never complained about my mother's cooking. My husband remembers her meals as wonderful. We were raised on meat, potatoes, and vegetables. We never had rice. My mother once told me she wanted second prize at a 4-H contest. She didn't come in first because she had poured the gravy on the potatoes, and that was supposed to be kept separate for the person to choose how much they wanted. Naturally, I didn't learn how to cook anything from her because I never took part in meal prep. As I said, we were served. My mother worked in a retirement home as a cook. She enjoyed that job a lot. She would wear a brooch and it worked as a conversation starter with the elders. She also managed the pro shop at the golf course where my father was the greenskeeper. She had a reputation for making the best sandwiches. At the time, we lived in a little house on the golf course. I remember my parents being so annoyed with the early bird golfers. They could hardly wait for the sun to come up, and that meant that the golf course cart storage had to be unlocked and the coffee shop open. Someone might even need to pay green fees. Us kids worked in the pro shop coffee bar too. It was easy access to chocolate bars and cigarettes. My mother would go to the bathroom there and find my coffee cup with 3 teaspoons of sugar and cigarette butts in the toilet while I swore I wasn't smoking. My mother could also be found sitting in her chair by the window, hair in curlers, and those thin scarves tied around them. She liked to knit baby sweaters for the hospital gift shop as they were fast and they were cute. It was in this chair that she suggested that maybe I'd like to be a secretary, get my hair done and paint my nails. This was preparation for me to attend the 4-year secretarial high school in Schreiber because my marks were not good enough for the 5-year course at the Terrace Bay High School. Around the kitchen table, I learned that university was for other people's kids. College was for other people's kids. We weren't smart enough and we didn't have that kind of money. In fact, my mother was of the opinion that we didn't measure up in most areas. It seemed everybody else's kids were better and smarter. In the same chair that my mother knit, she spent many hours crying and praying that my sister Brenda would come home after running away to British Columbia. This was the chair my mother worried about becoming pregnant with my sister Kathy at such a mature age. My sister Lois had a child 2 years after Kathy was born. My mother didn't go out for 9 months. This was the chair my mother sat in the dark, waiting for me to come home in the early morning hours after hanging out with my friends. Yes, this chair went through a lot with my mother. She never asked for anything. I said to my mother, "Why don't you get a new table?" "Why should I? I have a table," she said. "But I have always wanted a corner cupboard." It just so happened that while I was flipping through my latest country magazine at home in Geraldton, I came across a photograph of a very rustic corner cupboard, and as I looked at it, I decided I could make that and give it to my mother. It was nothing but planks of wood with triangle pieces in the middle. Surely I could do that. "Where do you buy wood?" I asked my husband. He said, "At the lumber yard." I said, "Where's that?" The next thing you know, I'm sawing boards and nailing planks of wood together because the corners of the doors didn't match up too well. I used a jigsaw to cut out silhouettes of horses and put them over the corner joints of the door, which had glass behind it. I had used mirror hooks to hold the glass and 2 fake doors on the front with black country-looking handles. My father picked it up in his pink metallic Ford truck. However, during the ride home, all the nails became loose and they had to nail it all back together again. I had used finishing nails. It sat in my mother's kitchen for years and I was quite proud of it. It was very satisfying to actually do something for my mother. We were told not to buy flowers or anything silly like that. Just a waste of money, she said. By the time I got to grade 8, me, Sheila, and Darlene were smoking and hanging out at the rec center. We weren't being very good girls. We hitchhiked regularly to Schreiber, 9 miles away, where we semi-attended high school. I mostly suffered through class, picked an argument with the teacher, and then headed to the hangout spot up the street for lunch, chocolate bar, and cigarettes. I learned how to play pool there. We stole homemade wine from Darlene's basement and learned how to puke and not get it down the front of our shirts on weekends. We also hung out with a couple of bad guys. They were pushers, drug dealers. Sheila was actually Jim's girlfriend. I don't remember how she met him, as he was older. Dan was Jim's roommate, and he thought I was witty, so of course I liked him. You'll notice that this is where Darlene starts to drop out of the picture. She's gone to hang out with a girl named Sherry. I had an older friend too. His name was George. I had a real crush on this guy. I thought he looked fantastic. He had long hair and an air of sophistication. I thought he was so smooth. He hung out at the park and I would go talk to him. He had been in jail for robbing a liquor store. He was a fairly decent guy as far as I could tell and never took advantage of me. He never talked much, but he was a great listener and seemed to get a kick out of my jabbering. He had a nickname for me. He called me Speedy. I could tell him about some of the parties at Jim's and the black light and the one time I dropped a quarter hit of Yellow Sunshine acid on blotter paper. I really didn't think that little piece of paper could do anything to me, but it did. I felt like I had 3 tape recorders inside my head all playing at the same time. I saw my bedroom door fall over and come back up again and again. And I drew my hand in front of my face. It was like blurred slow motion. George advised me not to hang around these guys. He said I didn't need them and he didn't want to see me get into trouble someday. I would do just about anything for George, so I decided to take his advice. Sheila was breaking up with Jim anyway after her real scare that she might be pregnant. After Sheila broke up with Jim, she started to date this guy with a car, Roland. I thought he was a real idiot. This sitting around waiting for your friend that had a boyfriend with a car was the pits. I needed a boyfriend too. I remember this day distinctly as I went to the rec center. My usual routine, lit a cigarette, and checked out the boys leaning against the wall. No, there really wasn't anything interesting, but I was on a mission. Let's see, who's a real loser? Who needs me as bad as I need him? Then I saw him. He was tall with tight curly hair. I was listening to Bob Dylan, Jimi Hendrix, and Janis Joplin at the time. I walked right up to him with a pounding, nervous heart, and I said, "Do you want to go for coffee?" All the other boys looked shocked, including the one with curly hair, but he said, "Sure." I went out with this guy for about 2 years, and I can't really remember the first time he abused me. What I remember is going home and just getting over it, telling myself I deserved it or whatever made sense at the time. I did just about anything to make myself believe that for some reason or other I deserved it. I was being too smart-mouthed, didn't notice he was getting mad at me or something. For sure, it was something I did. That's what I thought. He mostly just cuffed me like a slap. Most of the time we'd been drinking, so that been a good excuse too. I used denial a lot and refused to believe it was even happening. I spent a lot of time in my room working on my reality and didn't see much of my parents. I was living in a fantasy world and I was good at it. I was good at daydreaming. I dreamt about going to school and becoming a social worker or an artist on the street. I dreamed of having a place of my own. I wasn't in school, but you will hear more on that later. My sister got married, and my mother knew I was having sex in the basement. I was about 18 years old. She put the pressure on me to get married quick before I got pregnant. It's really too bad she didn't think of suggesting birth control. My sister got in on the act too. I remember once overhearing my mother giving her instructions on what to tell me when she took me downtown for coffee and my forbidden cigarette. Living in a small town, I guess Mother thought I would marry this guy eventually. Might as well do it now. The biggest mistake of my life. The only classes I really liked in high school was English and theater arts. I had to take the 4-year secretarial course at the high school in the next town. I've mentioned this before. I did learn how to type. I dropped out in grade 11. I got a job at a ladies' and menswear shop called Moores. I was going nowhere fast and had no idea how to see my future. My friends had gone away to school and I was hanging out with this guy. My mother and sister were pressuring me to get married. I was married for 3 months. One day I had enough. I was certain I didn't do anything wrong. He grabbed me and slammed me into the wall. I walked up the street to my mother-in-law's house and showed her the marks he left on my arms. She said very quietly to me, "He does that to me too." That was a surprise. She wanted us to go for marriage counseling. I didn't want to go. I didn't see anything worth saving. I just wanted out. So I walked down the street to my mother's house and rolled up my sleeves. My parents were shocked and supportive. I told them the violence was getting worse and worse. I was walking on eggshells. I just couldn't make up any more excuses for him. He was like a walking time bomb. Anything could set him off. It was getting really scary, and I didn't have a bedroom I could go to, lock the door, and dream of better days. Then there was the big dilemma, who gets what from the wedding from the 3 months ago. Like I said, I just wanted out. My mother felt it wasn't fair that he was the bad guy, gets all the stuff, and I have to leave town to save face. Like I said before, I just wanted out. He married again, had a child. She left him too for the same reason. I like to hear this because it makes me feel better. What used to really make me mad was that no one would talk to me about it. I really needed to hear it wasn't my fault over and over again. One day I got really upset with my sister because she was avoiding the subject again. I finally got to the bottom of the silent treatment. She said she avoided the discussion because she felt so guilty and was so embarrassed that she helped to convince me to get married in the first place. Her confession really helped me understand a very confusing part of my life. I moved in with my friend Sheila and her roommate Dorothy to help with the rent in Thunder Bay. They were going to the college taking a marketing course. I would hang out at the college too, going to the dances and having coffee. I had a part time job at Bata Shoes. Sheila was still dating the boy back home, Roland, and she got pregnant. That was the end of her education. Before she left, Sheila had told me about this guy in her class who she thought I'd really like. I remember this day distinctly too. There was a curling spiral staircase in the college that took you to the cafeteria. This guy with the greatest blue eyes was coming down the stairs as I was going up. He was short with soft curly hair. He seemed brotherly like. He had on a plaid shirt that was so worn out you could see right through it. The nicest guy I ever met. He kind of blushed when you talked to him, and he laughed easily. We just hung out together, and then after a while, in order to save some rent money, we moved in together. His name was Carey. We talked a lot about how we were raised. We both agreed that we both came from dysfunctional families and therefore made a good pair. It was time to start over, and I didn't need to be carrying around all that crap from the big mistake. The more I hung around these students, the more I started to get really annoyed that they were getting an education and a label of being smart. I was jealous. I really wanted the smart label too. Carey told me I should go back to school as a mature student. He said to get a student loan, so I applied. I wanted to take early childhood education, but they did some kind of test and said I couldn't read well enough. Carey wouldn't let it go. He said, go back and show them the marks you got when you took that correspondence course and marketing when you worked at the store. So I made an appointment and went back to see the counselor, Bill, who said, well, okay, you can take general business. I decided to take the most people course I could find within the general business course, which I guessed was industrial relations and personnel. And so I got a student loan. The idea was just to go to school for 1 year so I could say I went to college, but I did so well the first year, trying to prove to myself that I could do it. Then I wanted to go the next year too. In my second year, Carey was doing placement, so he wasn't at school, and I spent a lot of time studying, and that got me even more really good marks. Well, I'm not totally being honest here. I didn't pass math. Trying to make sense of my mess of marks, I thought I would take another year or so and focus on the math and any other subject I was having trouble with, eventually getting my diploma, even if it did take me longer. Wishful thinking. The college had a theory that all students should be well rounded, so they made you take a course or two outside your chosen field. I took a human study course and just loved it. That was the course I should have taken, and everyone in that class told me so. And don't forget, I originally wanted to take early childhood education. The industrial relations and personnel course didn't have a great record for women graduating, and people told me this. I didn't believe them at first, and then later I started saying, well, it's time for that to change. Once the news got around that I actually wanted to take the third year, pressure was on. I was the only girl in the program. Sorry. Teachers were Teachers embarrassed me every chance they could. One teacher held up my report in the air over his head and walked around the classroom saying something. I couldn't understand him as he was Pakistan, and then he dropped it in the waste paper basket. Mr. Chipman really seemed to enjoy the task of tearing me down. He would sit with me in the cafeteria every chance he could get and tell me how I wasn't going to make it. I was too emotional. I flipped off the handle, etc., etc. He made a point of reminding me that in some courses you weren't allowed to proceed in your course unless you had passed all your subjects. I just didn't understand why they were picking on me. If they were so sure I wasn't going to make it, why didn't they just let me fail? And why did they really start to put the pressure on when I started talking about taking the math later? They acted like it was their job and duty to get rid of me. Carey had gotten his first job with the Royal Bank, and they transferred him out to Hamiota, Manitoba. School was getting really awful for me. Mr. Chipman told me I was just going to get married and have kids anyway. Why didn't I quit? That really upset me, but it's exactly what I did. I lost the battle, but I won the war, in my opinion. Mrs. Latham had attended many weddings. Gifts were bought. I was just as happy to go to the city hall, but we decided to give Mrs. Latham her wedding. Carrie's older brother hadn't gotten married, and she had been waiting for a wedding for a long time. I didn't seem to care about any of the preparations, and what I did care about, I was told it was too expensive. In particular, I wanted pictures. Oh, that was too expensive. Someone will bring a camera. On one side of the family, my sister's husband was the only one who brought a camera. That's why I have maybe 5 photographs of our wedding. I wanted a really long, I mean yards of ribbon with my lily of the valley flowers out of Mrs. Latham's garden. Too expensive. My ribbon was 12 inches long. My parents acted like it was a big burden to even attend the ceremony. I could tell they wished we went to City Hall too. I spent the night before my wedding day in a hotel room by myself with a newspaper article my mother had clipped out for me. It was about making porridge. Apparently, if you made your husband a good bowl of porridge, everything would be all right. I cried that night. They forgot me at the hairdresser's the day of my wedding, and I had to walk down through town with pin curls in my hair. I even bought my own wedding ring by myself because the one we had ordered didn't come in on time. That didn't feel very romantic. My sister, who was the maid of honor, accidentally banged herself with their car door the day before the wedding, and it left her with a big black eye. Living in Hamiota was terrible. We had a very large apartment above the bank. I was isolated every day and I had no friends. Carrie went to work while I did nothing until I started to work at the hospital in the kitchen and later cleaning the rooms part time. The staff at the bank went to the bar every night after work. Eventually, they asked me to join them. I drank a lot. I got scared when I started to have blackouts. I couldn't remember parts of what happened. I really wanted to have a baby, but Carrie said there was things he wanted to do. When I asked him what they were, he couldn't answer me. I couldn't think of anything we couldn't do with a baby, unless it was to take a long bike ride. It was the best vacation we ever had. We bought 2 bikes and rode them from Hamiota to Regina, staying in motels and eating in restaurants. We went home to visit that summer as well, and my sister's husband was taking some courses. This inspired me to return to high school. As I didn't complete the college course and I had dropped out of high school, I still didn't have an education. I couldn't say I had high school, and I could only say I went to college because I didn't graduate. Married and 6 months pregnant, I attended Hamiota Collegiate. They granted me some credits from attending college, so I only had to take 4 courses, one semester. I bought myself an oil painting set and had some fun with that. I even sold a painting at the fair to a teacher from Winnipeg. I started to read a lot of parenting books. We moved to Fort Frances. Carrie was really unhappy with the administrative part of his job at the bank, so he applied for an accounting position at Umex Mine in Pickle Lake. He went to check it out, and when he came back, he told me there was really great housing. So we packed up the car, and with our 9-month-year-old Nancy, we headed north. The trees started to get shorter and shorter. I began to sob. Where are you taking us? I read a sign that said, no gas stations for 160 miles. Just on the outskirts of town, there was a few shacks, Carrie said. See the housing? He has a sixth sense of humor. I even saw a teepee by the side of the road. We turned the corner, and there was a subdivision of Toronto right smack dab in the middle of nowhere, row housing. They use row housing because it's so cold up there, it helps to insulate the walls, not because there's a shortage of land. See Girls' Birth Story, Part 3. We moved in and we moved and we moved and we moved. That's Pickle Lakes Entertainment. The people are so transit, moving in and out. There was one street and it made a loop to the lake view. When someone moved out, we moved in, making your way to the view of the lake. That's as good as it got. The mine closed down and Kerry quickly went to Kenora to get a position with Indian Affairs. He was supposed to be based out of Sioux Lookout, but thank goodness there was no available housing. We stayed in Pickle Lake, and Carrie flew around weeks at a time to reserves, leaving me at home with the baby, my two friends, and their children. There was painting, cookie making, and water play. This was an isolated community. Sometimes I would take a small plane to Terrace Bay. Indian Affairs finally moved us to Geraldton. I was reading child development books like crazy, and most of them are based on self esteem. I learned a lot, and I was on a serious mission to be the best parent ever. I also managed to raise myself all over again while I raised my firstborn. I was angry at my mother for a long time. One day I was letting her off the hook. I said, "Yeah, but you didn't have all this information back then. You didn't know what you were doing wrong and how important education is." She said she did know, but she was just being too self centered. I don't believe that. My mother was dealing with my sister who ran away and my father's binge drinking. Not being mature enough to really understand, it took me a long time to get over that. But finally, one day, I learned how to forgive her. We all do the best we can with what we've got at the time. In Geraldton, I met my friend Heather. She had actually taken early childhood education and was raising her daughter by the book. I admired her. We went we met through kids' swimming lessons. She had picked my daughter out as a good playmate for her daughter. I was flattered. We got along great and still do to this day. I had another baby. Her name was Kate. She was born within 2 hours. I had third-degree ribs and I was at 105 pounds. At this point, I was still smoking, but after Kate was born, I suddenly realized I wanted to be around to witness my daughter's lives. I finally realized that I was addicted. I got some nicotine gum and quit smoking. Heather was always visualizing the future. She was always collecting things for her next place. She had another child too, and shortly after Kate was born, we had a lot of fun raising kids and decorating in the country style, making crafts, and I was still trying to paint. Heather has always had high standards, and I learned to raise my bar through her. She has been a good friend all these years. My other friend was Bernice. She was a community worker and helped me get a job at the Battered Women and Children Crisis Center as a counselor. She's a very nice person, and I'm glad to know her. Bernice is so easy to talk to, and I'm sure I've used her as a therapist more than once. I was given the position as a counselor. Small town, there is not a lot of qualified people in Geraldton. I mostly was just nice to the people and taught them crafts. We were told to just listen. It was not a great place to work. Rather depressing, and I had mostly the night shift. I was working part-time. It was a way to be a social worker without being qualified. I had to leave Kate at a babysitter for about 2 days a month. That was the 2 day shifts, and I couldn't handle it. No one could do the job I was supposed to be doing because I was supposed to be doing it. I was her mother. I thought it might be better to parent full time so that maybe my children don't end up in the crisis center. I was getting evidence at the center that how you were raised had a big influence on your choices in life. Indian Affairs closed their office down in Geraldton and we moved to Sudbury, Ontario. I met a lady who lived on the corner. Her name was Linda. She wanted to babysit Nancy and Kate. I didn't need a babysitter, but I did need a friend. Eventually, I started looking after children because Linda was often visiting at my house, and she convinced me it was a way to stay home and still make some money. I thought people wouldn't leave their children with me, a perfect stranger, but I was wrong. They would, and they did. I put my full efforts into the job and got little in return. I thought I might go back to college and get my early childhood education after all. I had another college test done. This counselor told me the results of the test. He said I was an SAR, which means I'm a social, artistic, realistic. He also mentioned that this was interesting as most women don't have the R. I asked him what that could mean about me, and he said it meant that I likely had a hard life. Then he mentioned the cost of the course and told me that there would be no money in the near future to pay early childhood educators, so I could expect low wages and a lot of hard work. He said the money was going to go to all the baby boomers' health problems. I volunteered in kindergarten rooms from 3 mornings a week for 9 months. Next thing you know, I'm doing all kinds of programs for them, and it was extremely rewarding. I really liked helping the students that were struggling for some reason or other. They were the ones that need the help the most. I guess it was my way to be a teacher without being qualified to teach. As rewarding as the volunteer work was, I wanted to make some money like all the parents whose children I was helping. I was in need of a job that was rewarding, but with some financial gain. I felt I owed that to my children now. They didn't need me to tie their shoes anymore, but if I made some money, I would help buy the purple and pink jackets everyone else was wearing in the 1980s. As rewarding as my volunteer work was, I wanted to make some money. Oh, yeah, like all the parents who children. Sorry. I was in need of a job that was rewarding. I said that. I felt I owed that to my children now. Yeah, I said that. Okay, sorry, wrong paragraph. Here we go. Heather had made a comment to me that totally shocked me. She said she thought I had low esteem when I lived in Geraldton. It bothered me so much I started to read tons of books on self-esteem. I considered myself quite the expert on the subject and discovered that self-esteem begins to go down bit by bit, starting from the day that you realize that others will judge you. Self-esteem fluctuates. It rarely stays in the same level all the time, I learned. It's how you think about yourself, and your self-concept is the result of that. The big surprise for me was it's your choice. How you think about yourself is up to you. I worked hard to build up my self-esteem, and I was determined to protect it. I know I'm a worthy person just because I am. I'm an original like everyone else. See the loaded question story, part 3. Then I read a book called Super Self, and it changed my life. It gave me direction and taught me how to set goals and take control of my life. Not to just let things happen, but to be aware of my opportunities and make my choices. It was a light bulb moment. This book also recommended that it's a good idea to pick one thing, one skill, and get very good at it. I picked sewing. I liked clothes, and I had some experience as my mother taught me a little when I was a teenager, and I had continued to sew and learn on my own. I set some sewing goals, watched Nancy Zimmerman on TV, and got books from the library. One day I went with my daughter Nancy to a store called Stage and Street. Nancy was about to buy her first pair of point shoes. We went in a door and up an elevator and then turned to the left. We went down a long hallway and stepped into the most fantastic place I've ever been. There was this lady about my age with strawberry hair up in a bun, and to the right of her was a huge sewing room with a costume of a teapot hanging against the wall. There were patterns and rolls of bolts of material. I couldn't believe my eyes that something this wonderful was happening right here in Sudbury, not in Toronto, not in Vancouver, but right here on Elgin Street. The lady with the strawberry hair seemed to have a lot of self-esteem. I went home and wrote her a letter. My Super Self book said, "You have to take risks. You have to be willing to be rejected in order to get what you want. I told her in my letter that I would work for her for free if she would just let me come to her studio to learn how to do what she does. I was asking to be her apprentice. I was going to use her for my mentor, my role model. I think we'll pause here and start another video. She didn't answer my letter, so following my book's advice, I picked up the phone and called her. She said she didn't believe my letter, but if it was true, to come for an interview and to bring examples of my sewing. We hit it off. She got free labor and someone that thought she was great. I think she had a lot of courage to start her own business, and she had enough self-esteem to do something that a lot of us women just talk about. She took her craft sewing and turned it into something the world values. I worked there for 6 months, and then I told her I had to have some kind of financial reward for coming downtown, paying for my parking, and working for 8 hours, 5 days a week. I told her all I needed was $125 and please pay for my parking. She said, okay. The atmosphere was wonderful. We would start the day with a cup of tea and chat. Evelyn's grandbaby would be in the high chair with Angie. Her daughter-in-law was working on some stock. Then we would get down to work doing what we loved, making and creating. That was the place for me. I had different tasks from time to time. I made puppets and porcelain heads and painted mask creations. Creative suggestions were always welcome. Anything that needed made, we would make it. I really enjoyed the theater part, and I was often given special projects to work on, like the golden tutu and hand sewing. Evelyn did all the cutting and we did the sewing. Many times we worked into the wee hours of the morning to meet a deadline for a dance troupe. I liked Evelyn a lot, and when the business was small, we were like friends. See Golden Tutu story. Ev was the type of person that could fake it till she made it. She never let on to her customers that she didn't know what she was going to do. She knew she would figure it out. She had a lot of self-confidence. Her husband had had a brain injury and was on disability, and therefore he was available to be her gopher, doing all the little jobs. See We Don't Bite, Story 6 and Part 3. Evelyn had a sweet spot for drag queens that visited the shop. They wanted wigs and costumes. There was one gay male dresser, Justin, a friend of her daughter's, that hung out at the studio on a regular basis. He was funny and lots of fun. In the end, however, he ended up running up a bill and never paid it. Later on, she hired Pam. Ev was not always nice to Pam, and often Pam was in tears. Pam came from a toxic family life, and she was desperate for a job, so she put up with a lot that Ev dished out to her. I picked up Pam every morning on my way to work and listened to the drama that happened the night before with her loser of a boyfriend. Her father was a drug dealer, and he eventually got me into trouble. But more on that later. Then Evelyn hired a woman who could not speak. She could sew. She was brought on through some government program that helped pay her wages. Evelyn's business was growing fast. She didn't handle the pressure of it very well. Her health, which wasn't good to begin with, started to get worse. She was having home problems. She started to treat me in a way I didn't like to be treated. Things came to a head when the mute lady was crying at her machine, and Evelyn ignored her. It had been some really great years of my life, but all good things must come to an end. I told her it had been fun and I appreciated everything she taught me, but now I must leave. Well, at least that was the speech I had planned in my head, and I did say that, but to be honest, I also added a few more things, such as how I thought she should behave towards her employees. How did Pam's father get me into trouble? He worked for Revenue Canada. After I had left State and Street, Pam came to my house and said her dad said that Evelyn was doing wrong and we needed to report her. She said Evelyn would never know it was us that reported her. Carrie had always been upset that I was not paying into this or that for income tax or whatever, and he was always upset I was working for so little. Carrie sometimes gave Evelyn a hard time, just an attitude, because he really wasn't pleased with her, but I enjoyed it so much he just let me continue. Anyway, I agreed to sign the paper. Boom. Next thing you know, I was getting letters in the mail from lawyers that said I owed Evelyn thousands of dollars. I was told to ignore these letters as it was only a scare tactic. It was nerve-wracking, and I was so shocked that she would do this when she knows darn well she was not playing by the rules. The letters stopped coming. The funny thing to me is, a few years later, Pam went back to work for her, and Evelyn also asked me if I wanted to do piecework at home. As if. I said no, thank you. I had joined a hiking group in Sudbury where I met Mary. She reminded me of an English teacher. She was a wannabe artist. We became friends on the trail one day. I told her I would love to belong to a reading group. She insisted we start one. So I did a lot of research on the benefits of a reading group, and we put an ad in the paper and people came. This is where I met Gail. Our reading group met once a month and each person took turns hosting. Eventually the group split into two parts, those that enjoyed more fluffy reading and those that enjoyed more serious reading. I was in the serious book side. Eventually it came to an end, but Gail and I continued to be friends. I then went to work at Helen's Tailoring part-time. The owner doesn't even know how to sew. The girl who does has a real chip on her shoulder, doesn't like the world or anyone in it. I couldn't handle the environment, so I told the owner, I just don't feel like I fit in here. She shook her head knowingly. I think she's heard this before. I walked into the grocery store and there was a want ad for cashiers. Being everyone's friend for 3 minutes loading and lifting tons of groceries, I found the job physically hard on my aging body. I like the interaction with the customers and a lot of the people I work with, but I'm not willing to ruin my body for money. 2 years will be enough of this. See Becoming a Punk in the third part. I had the luxury of quitting jobs because our lifestyle was adjusted to our one income. Any money I brought in was bonus. When Kate was searching for a course to take after high school and I was looking at the programs available in Sudbury for her to consider, I said to her, look, there's a 3-year fine arts and craft course. You get to do all this stuff like painting, sculpture, printmaking, drawing, mixed media, along with a bit of English, art history, and there's no math. She said, well, if you think it's so great, why don't you take it? And so I did. I had just read a self-help book by Dr. Phil, and it said that if you are upset with your education, that feeling is never going to go away. No matter how many times you convince yourself that you're just fine with what you have, you will never totally convince yourself until you get the education you want. So apparently, I was never going to get over not having a decent education. I thought all education included math, but not this course. I did well in English. I actually drove my teachers and fellow students crazy by requesting to do more than what was assigned. The younger students were super nice to me. I hung out with Julie and Leah. We had so much fun. Some teachers drove us crazy. Some teachers were not so good, but some were great. I had a bit of a time adjusting to being marked and measured. I didn't come from high school, so this was a little annoying to me, but I learned a lot and I finally knew something about something. I had a diploma in fine arts. How cool is that? I have a 3-ring binder available with my school papers and photos of projects and letters I have. Finally, I took the right course. This was right up my alley, even if I was 47 years old at the time and graduated on the honors roll with a 4.0 average. I was 50 years old when I graduated. Still not valuing my work for money, I had offered a sculpture to a TV personality, Brad Lamb, and he took it. Artists on Elgin also like to put pressure on me to be producing new work to keep the store interesting. Volunteering in the store was fun until there seemed to be too much office politics going on, gossiping about other artists and who sold what, when. Eventually, the place closed down after they finally stopped getting grants by interns by government grants. Mm, see book club story in the third part. I also did a few kid workshops at the Art Gallery of Sudbury. I found the administrating people frustrating as they kept changing their minds what they wanted. They did say my mixed media workshop was the best ever. Frankly, no kidding. I killed myself on that one with too many kids and not enough helpers. Glue guns flying. It was stressful. Right out of school, I helped jury an art exhibit from the high schools. I also did some work for Better Beginnings, Better Futures art and photography workshops. The woman running the place was a real character. Can't say I was impressed with her, and I wasn't going to sit in her office all afternoon while she scrolls through a computer looking for funds to pay me. No thanks. I have other ways to spend my time. See art album for more information on this too. I just joined the art I joined the Sudbury Art Club a couple of times trying to find people with common interests, and it just didn't work for me. I did do a presentation there in front of about 25 people on setting goals in art. Nerve-wracking but fun. However, most of these people are there just for the social, or they want to make art their career, which is not my thing, and there's always the underlying competitiveness that I don't enjoy. Finally, I decided I'm a hobby artist. I'm not interested in becoming famous or making money from my art. I'm not prepared to do what you have to do to get there. I enjoy painting portraits for my family, and sometimes people would see my paintings on my walls and ask for me to paint them. I had discovered the Zorn palette on the internet, which helped a lot with my paintings. I enjoy painting my grandkids and their parents, our family, dogs, and for myself. I like painting as a hobby, not a career. See Joyce's grand celebration in part 3. When I first learned I was going to be a grandmother, I wasn't sure if it would ever happen. If my daughters didn't have children, I would have been content with loving them the way I always had. And then came the news that Kate, she and Dave were expecting a baby. I was overjoyed and cried tears of happiness. The dreams and hopes for this little one, the child of Kate and Dave St. Onge, began to fill my heart. I spent a lot of time thinking about what kind of grandparents Carrie and I would be, what our roles would be, what would truly matter for this child's future. From raising my own children, I have learned that it wasn't about the career they would have or the education they'd get. What mattered most was what kind of person they would grow up to be. Would they be honest, loving, caring, and kind? Those were the qualities I hoped to nurture in this tiny being. Kate's pregnancy went smoothly. She never complained about the challenges, her growing belly, or swollen feet. She was a trooper. Karen wanted to throw a baby shower, so I crocheted 2 blankets and started buying books. We also purchased a crib for the baby, a little boy. It was so exciting. I spent time trying to decide what I would be called, even doing a survey online. Grandma J was the perfect fit, and I was happy with that choice, but it didn't stick. I was Grandma, a role I was more than happy to take on. Excuse me. Oh, okay. Dave had painted yellow and green stripes in the baby's room, and we delivered the crib together. The baby shower was a wonderful event filled with clothes and excitement. Nancy and Dave's sister Chantel came to celebrate. Dave, of course, was the life of the party, enjoying every moment. I have to get a glass of water. I'll be right back. I hope that thing on my glasses didn't bother you the whole time. Okay, where was I? Dave had painted yellow and green stripes in the babies. Okay, Chantel came to celebrate. Dave, of course, was the life of the party, enjoying every moment. We took lots of pictures, and Karen's, Dave's mom, and I shared photos of Kate and Dave as babies. The anticipation was nerve-wracking, and all I could do was hope everything went well. Finally, the big day arrived. The due date came and went, but Kate's doctor assured us that they wouldn't let it go too much longer. One day, while Carrie was at Kate's house helping with something, Kate came down the stairs and said, "Don't go nuts, but my water just broke." She called Dave, and they went to the hospital when the time was right. We got messages on our phones, but Kate and Dave wanted some time alone after the baby arrived before we visited. We all waited, wondering if the baby would be born 12, 12, 12 at 12. And sure enough, he was. A perfect, sweet baby boy. The photos they sent us were priceless. Such a miracle. We couldn't wait to visit. Karen and Ron went first, then Carrie and I. We had been crying and anxious from the wait, but when we finally saw him, we couldn't help but cry again. He was adorable, and they had put a little Santa hat on him, which made him even cuter. Kate, Dave, and the baby went home the next day, and we couldn't stop crying every time we looked at him. Grandpa Carey had a real waterfall of tears, and we teased him about it. It was pure joy. See Henry and Alice's story. I also took so many pictures of our precious grandson and played them on the digital photo at home until the next time I saw him. I rocked him to sleep, and every little thing he did was exciting, waving his hand, wiggling his fingers, or even the tiny milestones like lifting his head or blowing bubbles. As he grew, he started rolling over, and although he didn't enjoy tummy time, he did it anyway. Everyone said he looked just like Dave, and they were right. Henry was such a delight. He loved to lay on his back and pound his heels, bang, bang, bang. One time he even developed a blister on his heel from all the smashing, which worried Dave and Kate for a moment, but he was just doing what he loved. He loved his bouncy seat and played with his toys hanging down. He was a calm, easy baby, and when Grandpa Carey had heart failure, baby Henry was there to cheer us up. I'll never forget the night Henry had his bath in the kitchen and splashed water everywhere. It was so cute and lightened the mood during a tough time. Oh. As the weeks passed, Henry grew and became even more fun. He loved to giggle, especially when Dave played games with him, and Kate could always make him smile. I looked forward to the day I could sit with him at the table with the rest of us. When he started pulling himself up, I knew things were changing. He loved playing with the DVD player and the TV buttons, so we had to cover them up. His owl hat became his signature look, and when he wore it, he was the star of the show, stopping traffic wherever he went. Grandpa Carey took him on long walks every morning, 2 hours. They walked through the streets with Henry, excited to see all the cars. In winter, we pulled him in a little sleigh with a windbreaker to keep him warm. We also had a plastic pool, and I remember the first day we watched him play in it on the front lawn under the shade of the tree. It was so sweet. He had so many favorite things, his Hot Wheel cars, which he could play with for hours, and his push stick duck. He loved fruit and would try anything from the adult table. His little foam chair became his place to eat lunch and watch TV, and he used to get so excited about every car that passed by. He waved at the neighbors when they drove by, and I loved watching him play upstairs with his trolley and cars. As he got older, he learned to climb onto the big bed and loved to roughhouse. He'd pull your finger and lead you to where he wanted you to go. He was full of love and sweetness, and we all adored him. His nature was so kind, and he brought us so much joy to our lives. In his first February, I organized a fundraiser from the Infant Food Bank in his honor, and we raised $600. It was so special. Every moment with him felt like a gift, and we were incredibly lucky to have him in our lives. As Henry neared his second birthday, we knew we had many more adventures ahead. Every day was filled with joy, and we cherished each new milestone. Henry got more wonderful as days passed. He was a reader and writer. He would write his own stories using his toys as the characters and illustrations. He loved Minecraft, a game you play on the computer. He was playing chess at a very young age, and poor Grandpa hardly won, and he was trying so hard. Collecting hockey cards was a real passion. He had memorized all the stats. Air hockey, always on the go. You had to watch out for flying sticks in the air. I would make him whatever he wanted. Hockey shirts with chosen names on the back and the number, a goalie stick, a Minecraft character costume. When he played with Hot Wheels, I put tape all over the floor so he could build a town to drive in. We even named the streets, which he got a kick out of. He has such a great sense of humor. Now that he's 12, he's into soccer. Alice, the kind-hearted creator. Alice was born on a dreary, overcast day, but to those waiting anxiously for her arrival, it felt like the world had never been brighter. The waiting was unbearable, so much excitement, so much nervous energy, and then finally the big news came. She was here and she was perfect. The first photograph arrived, a tiny bundle of warmth and promise, and Grandma felt her heart swell with a love so pure it brought tears to her eyes. Grandma and Grandpa cried off and on that day, overwhelmed with the emotion of love, the sheer joy of welcoming this new little soul into the world. Alice was already deeply adored. She had arrived with barely any newborn clothes, so when Kate asked Grandma to pick some up, she took the task on with pure delight. There was something so special about choosing the softest, sweetest things for her granddaughter, tiny outfits that would wrap her up in love. Alice was a bundle of surprises from the start. She had a tricky relationship with milk, keeping everyone on their toes with her sudden, unexpected episodes. Reflux episodes. She was also sensitive to laundry soap, her delicate skin reacting to even the gentlest of detergents. But what stood out the most, beyond the little challenges, was her enormous, radiant smile, the kind of smile that lit up the room and melted hearts instantly. As she grew, she kept pace with her big brother Henry with an adventurous spirit. The the couch cushions became mountains to climb and forts to build. She bounced, she stumbled, she played with uncontainable joy. And then there was a little round rug, her stage. With ballet music drifting through the air, she would twirl and dance, lost in a world of grace and imagination. It was impossible not to stop and watch, utterly charmed by her. Alice had quirks that made her even more lovable. If she got a scrape or a bruise, she wouldn't just put a bandage on her skin. She'd slap one onto her pants instead, as if it would somehow fix the whole situation. She had a beloved stuffed cat, worn and well-loved, that stayed with her long past its prime, its matted fur a testament to years of hugs and whispered secrets. When Alice spent time at Grandma's house, she was drawn to play kitchens and baby dolls, tenderly tucking them into beds and preparing imaginary meals with a focus and care that revealed her nurturing spirit. But she wasn't just a caregiver. She was an artist, a builder, a dreamer. She loved to sing and play the piano, her small fingers picking out melodies with pure joy. Bullet, the family dog, was her loyal companion, always by her side, as if he knew she had The kindest heart of all. Alice started school just before the world changed, before COVID forced everyone home. But she wasn't alone, thank goodness for Henry. Together they navigated that strange time, and in doing so, they formed an unshakable bond. They had each other, and that was enough. Even as a little girl, Alice showed wisdom beyond her years. She had no tolerance for meanness and instinctively protected the feelings of others. She especially looked out for Grandpa. Her gentle heart always attuned to his moods, always making sure he felt included, loved, and understood. At Grandma's house, Alice's creativity truly blossomed. She didn't just play with the dollhouses. She redesigned them. She turned the open space in Grandma's house into her own architectural wonders, sketching out rooms and asking Grandma to make furniture, from tiny couches to stuffed animals. And Grandma, ever the creator, met the challenge head on, sewing tiny treasures that made Alice's world even more magical. Now Alice is a big reader and writer. Her love of stories are strong, as her love for creating. She is still kind, still full of heart, still the same bright soul who once danced on a brown rug and designed imaginary houses. She's growing into a young girl with a strong sense of self, sharp as a whip, and sweet as ever. She will melt your heart, and Grandma knows Alice is going to do something wonderful with her life. She just has that spark. And that's the end of part 2. Part 3 coming up.